Okay, quick public service announcement for the series or playlist for the Final Fantasy VI battle system. I'm going to add the code to this repository here, and I'm going to put that link in a pinned comment on all of those videos just because it's getting kind of hard to follow. One caveat is it's not going to include the graphics and the audio just because technically that's proprietary stuff, even though it's available everywhere. And even though no one would actually care, YouTube of late has been kind of an environmentalist about these things, so that out of the way, at least this will allow people to follow the code itself. And if you replaced all the images and graphics with the same files that I have in the videos, then you'll obviously be able to work with that. I'll try and create a list at some point of the, maybe like a list of folders and files so that at least you'll have the structure to replace them at some point in the future. Anywho. Alright, welcome back. We're going to give Locke an actual attack animation today where he has a sword, and we're going to implement damage on the character as well in case he attacks himself or Tina in this case. So first we're going to create the animation, the attack animation we've all seen. So right here we have the animations that we've made before where he's just walking around or idle or whatever. We're going to add the attack animation where he actually moves and goes through a couple of different frames. So if you're using the same scene for the character as you do on the overworld, which I'm doing here, you do have to be careful in one thing. And the animations that exist and have this tree set up, that interferes if you're trying to create additional animations in the scene. So I'm going to take this animation tree and I'm going to uncheck active. That's really important because if I try to create additional animations where I have to move the character, this active tree is going to be snapping him back constantly, and that's really irritating. So keep that in mind. Also, to avoid confusion, I'm going to create a separate animation player for him as well. And I'm just going to call it Battle Animation Player. So first we need to create the animation, of course. So I'm just going to call it Attack. And he's actually going to move in this case, so I'm actually going to set a keyframe. Up here, you'll see whatever you have checked, like location, rotation, and scale. Any of those that are selected are going to be logged as a keyframe when you press this key button up here. So first we need to select what we're animating, and that's going to be the sprite right here. So now you see that shows up here, and we're going to add this keyframe, go ahead and create. And I want the weapon origin to go with him, so I'm actually going to select that as well. That might not be necessary if this is parented like that, but may as well. I'm going to move both of them anyway. So also I need the sprite from the sprite sheet that we're going to use, so I'm going to add a track for that as well. This is going to be the same as we did before. We're going to add a frame track. So here that is. We're going to insert a key here. So what we want here is the frame from the sprite sheet, which for my case is 28, where we have that ready battle stance. Because in the game the character pauses like that, but in that ready stance before actually lunging forward with the weapon. So one thing you'll notice is I have the position set to continuous and the sprite sheet animation is set to discrete. That's important. Even if you wanted to, you're not going to be able to like interpolate the sprite graphic because all it's going to do is interpolate in the sprite sheet and put frames in between whatever the order is on your sprite sheet. So that's not going to help. Okay, so we're going to go to about a second here. And because we want this to be a pause and then lunge forward suddenly, we don't want to put him in the next position yet. Since we want this to be a pause, we don't want him to start moving until here. So we need another keyframe for his position and such to keep him there. So it doesn't put us to another position in that 1 second. So we're going to add another one here. Same thing. And at 1.1, now we're going to move him. So make sure you don't have like rotation or scale or something up here. Select one of these that will move him. Go about here. And now we're going to insert another keyframe for each of those. Here we're going to change the sprite. And this one goes to this other position. If you play the game in slow motion, that's what I did. You'll see that's where he kind of flips over into that position. And this is where the sword is going to come out, which we'll get into after that, but we're going to make this animation first. So next, we're going to go to the next frame here, and we're going to bring him down after that. So once again, select the sprite. I got the origin parented to it, so this is fine. Then he's going to come down about yay here. We're going to set another keyframe for each, and also another sprite. This is going to be like I said, these numbers are just the order of the sprites in the sprite sheet. This is just the way it's set up in the sprite sheet I made. Okay, so now he's landed, the sword's forward. We'll handle that later, like I said. And again, if you've played the game, you'll know this. He hangs out here for just a moment and then runs real quick back to the beginning. So once again, we're going to keep him in the same position here because we don't want him to start running back in between here. So we're going to add another keyframe for each here. And this is where he's going to start running back. This happens very quickly in the game, but when, you know, if you watch the whole thing, it does make a difference. So this is going to be 18. You'll see him facing the other way. He's going to run back. And 2, he does, it's almost like a step. So there is one more frame in here, which is this one. And again, if you watch the game in slow motion, he kind of slides back in this orientation and then back to the original fight position. So at 2.1 here, now we're going to want to put him back in the original position and have him face the original direction. So we'll go back to here. And this is going to be 14 in my sprite sheet again. And now we need him to be back in the original position. And we're going to make this minus... This is just what I had him originally. So it would be, you know, it doesn't really matter as long as, you know, you're consistent. So there we go. And of course we need the keyframe. So because we've changed his position again, keyframe for this, keyframe for that. Okay, so that should be his basic animation. So I've set it to 2.2, so that should be the end of it. I'm going to go right back to the... Oh, that's interesting. I was intending to start from the beginning there. Details. All right, there we go. So we're going to add a weapon to this, but first we need to have the weapons exist. So I'm kind of redoing copies of these scenes so you folks can see them. So this Lightbringer or Illumina, if you like, I actually kind of preferred that. We're just going to grab some sprites again. Here's the original one, and you'll see it has this sash that kind of moves positions. So what I did is I cut that off as a separate sprite, and we have the slash that goes through the enemy. So you can see all this is really doing is it's going kind of from the top right to the lower left to give the appearance of moving through. I'm going to be lazy with that one instead of doing frame by frame because we can show the workflow and then we can do whatever we want, which is the point. So I'm going to add a node 2D here. You'll see why momentarily. And this is going to be the anchor for the sword itself. Because what we're going to want is we're going to add the sword to the scene, and I just want it to be able to pivot around this point. And then we're going to add the sword itself. So it's going to be a sprite 2D. And we need the texture right here. Alright, awesome. Now we're going to bring this up to the base here, and again this anchor is going to be right at the root of the scene here. And then within that we're going to have the sash. Like I said, I cut that off. So similarly, I'm going to create an anchor for the sash as well, because the sash is going to move relative to the sword if we were to copy the original, as in right here. Because again, this is not in the same position relative to the sword, just because it's giving an optical illusion there. But this will just show how we can do that. So I'm going to do the same thing, add another node 2D, and then another sprite. And this is going to have that sash. There we go. So first we need to move the node 2D, because that's going to be the pivot point. We need to, like, with this parented so it moves them both, make sure you're moving the node 2D. Let me actually label that. And we want that to be right about here. And then we can move the sprite so it pivots on that point as well. So now if we go to the sash anchor and let's say we took rotate, it'll do like so. Alright, so one thing we're going to need is an audio stream player, because when we have the attack, this is where I'm going to have the slash sound through enemy, death, whatever. Just a plain audio stream player is fine. And I've grabbed the sound before. We're going to throw that in here. And autoplay. So again, this is all going to happen from instantiation of this scene, and then it's going to be a child of lock on that pivot point we were talking about, this weapon origin, which is right here. So this is going to be relatively simple. We're going to add a new animation, call it attack as well. We're just going to use the anchors. I think you can set the pivot point for each sprite, but this just seemed a little more intuitive to me. Probably I'm wrong. So this is going to start kind of cocked back. So I'm just going to go with 45 degrees, I think. And again, the sash anchor, we don't want that to be starting like that. We want that right here. If we go to move, like I can adjust this a little bit to wherever I want it to be. So this will be the starting position for both. So on the sword anchor, we're going to do the same thing. Location, rotation, we don't really care about scale here because we're not changing it. Keyframe for that position, and on the sash anchor as well because it's a separate object. Keyframe. This one I'm going to make about 0.6 seconds long. Spoiler, I already tried it, that's why I'm picking that. This is another thing that happens pretty quickly. So at 0.2, I'm going to have it be in the forward position. So let me grab the sword anchor again. Go to rotate up here, bring that forward to, let's say there. And we're going to bring the sash via the anchor again. Actually needs repositioning. Again, we're going to move the sash so that it's more on the front side here instead of back here. And just kind of make it look like that. And we'll notice it flips on the x-axis as well, whatever the axis that is. So first, okay, let's first move it here, rotate it, figure out that the moving was way off. Okay, so we need to keyframe that as well. Sword keyframe, sash keyframe, anchor specifically. So now we got the movement. And to emulate the original, one last thing we want to do is flip that on the x-axis, the sash that is. So that's going to have to do with the sprite. So we're going to go to the sprite this time. And at the beginning here, I'm going to add a keyframe like before on this sprite 2D here. And we're going to call it flip horizontal. Because we can just take that property and hey, we're good. So right here, we're going to insert key. It's just a checkbox. And then we don't want it to flip horizontal there. We do want it to flip horizontal here, so we're going to go to checkbox, and there we go. So let's try that out. And it flips around. And that looks a little crappy. So we could delete these keyframes, and let's position that a little bit better. Whatever. Okay, so then let's put those keyframes back in. And there we go. And that's what the animation is going to look like. So a little bit of a pause because it's going to hang around for a little bit before it goes away. So next we also have the slash animation we're talking about. Meaning this piece right here. So I just made my own graphic like with a gradient in GIMP again just because this didn't seem worth it to me. But it's all the same. Okay, so here's the attack scene. So the scene for the cutting effect that goes through the enemy or character if you're pointing that way. So what I'm going to do here first is the node itself is going to start a little above, because when I was testing with this it appeared a little low on the character, but you can mess with that however you needed to. So we need the sprite, of course. Bring in the slash, and we need to rotate that. It's going to start at 45 degrees like so. Now we need the animation. Add a new attack animation. Very simple. So this time I am going to mess with the scale just to kind of shrink and expand that. Because again, that's kind of what happens here. It kind of grows and then shrinks. And I'm not going to worry about this middle section being completely gone at the end. So just to get something quick and dirty, we're going to start it here. Except let's go a little smaller. So on the sprite, we're going to go to the transform over here, and I'm going to scale the Y down to 0.5. And the reason when we started off that was straight up and down, if you're duplicating this, make sure you start with it straight up and down because that makes this a lot easier. You're just shrinking that by scaling the Y-axis, because if you started off with it at a 45-degree angle, it would just shear it, and then it would be more of a pain to work with. So we're going to do that, and I'm going to bump this off even more to the corner, like so, just kind of by the same amount on each axis so it has that nice diagonal movement. And that's going to be the starting keyframe. So again, I'm going to select scale up here because I do want scale to be part of this, and insert the keyframe. Then I'm going to go, and you'll notice something here is I'm going to do the animation for the slash in the same time window as the animation for the sword here. So you see here, this is 0.2. So this is going to take 0.2, and at the same time, this slash is going to also take 0.2. So 0.1 is going to be the middle of this. We're going to go to the sprite here and put this to 0, 0, and put this back up to 1. It's going to be the full size. That's going to be our second keyframe. Again, all three selected. And then 0.2, we're just going to do the opposite on the other end of it. So if we go -20, whoops. Yeah, so that puts, actually, I think it needs to go further than that. Let's do, there you go. Yeah, cut through that enemy. And then also cut down the scale. I'm going to cut down the X a little bit, I guess, so this is going to make it skinnier. Hardly worth fussing over. It's going to be like 1/10 of a second, and then it's going to be gone, but OCD. So now it's in this position. We're going to add that additional keyframe, and this is going to go away very quickly. So I'm going to make this 0.3. So this is going to be the animation then that goes through a character. Okay, so let's get into the coding piece of this a little bit. I made a diagram here to help myself and everyone. So one thing I want to mention is what we've already done in the damage text tutorial before is right here. We set the variables and then populate the damage text, and then it appears. So this is just going to be adding onto that so that we implement the sword, the slash, and the timing, basically. So I'm going to try and do this side by side to a point at least, so that way it's clear what's going on. So battle controller here, we're in this section of the code where we press a button and confirm. I did add this section here, so this is setting the hand cursor to false because we've selected, we're moving on. The icon above the character, that little triangle, disappear as well. And this is the event that fires off and tells the hand cursor script you're not selecting objects anymore, you're selecting menu. Because next time it selects something, it's going to be on the menu. If you want to dig deeper into this, check out the Final Fantasy VI Working Battle UI tutorial. That's where we set all of that stuff up. So this is down here saying if we're targeting any characters or targeting enemies respectively. We're going to pass in character and enemy objects or character and character objects if we're targeting ourselves. I did add this battle party action battle states. I haven't done much with that yet, but obviously this is going to be a different state to notice. So right here we're calling battle algorithms and battle animations in both cases. So it'll call either this one or this one for battle animations, and it's going to set some variables in this script, which are up here, and we'll use those a little later in the process here. So all this is doing now is storing those variables and playing that animation. So that animation we made for lock in this case. So here, that's what's happening right here. We start the animation, and the animation, we're going to call this method from the animation. Just a refresher, right here, this call method is going to call the fight animation. The reason we're doing it from the animation is because we want to wait for this pause. We don't want this stuff to happen until he actually starts lunging forward with the sword. And the reason we're doing this just to call this is because you can't, to my knowledge anyway, directly call another script from an animation. You have to call something on that script. So all I've done in that case is added this method of the character controller down here, which calls battle animations fight animation. One thing I do want to mention is I think there is a slightly better way to do this that I might do if I had it to do over again. You could extend Node 2D and create custom signals. So then basically whatever signals you added would be available just because it's a Node 2D, and then you could send the signal and then pick up that signal directly in here. So a workflow for another day. So now in battle animations, this is where we set them originally in that earlier step, and now the animation is going to fire this off. So I did add to the character class down at the bottom here, I added just like equipment, and that way we can store right hand equipped is all I bothered with for now just to get this working. So it's going to grab that Lightbringer that Locke has equipped from here from the database object. Then we're going to get the weapon origin, which is that node that basically determines the position where this is going to spawn. And then we're going to instantiate the weapon scene and add it at that point as a child. And then the attack scene, which is that slash, Similarly, here we're just using the naming convention, so Lightbringer underscore attack is the scene that I made. It's going to add that as a child of whatever we're targeting, so the slash goes through that character or enemy. So coming back over here, we've done this, and now we've done this as well. And this after a pause, that's where I was talking about here. We're waiting until here before that happens. So what I just mentioned here, that's the attack slash animation, and then the weapon gets instantiated here, and the weapon animation commences as well. So here, in order to have the damage text appear with the attack, I want the weapon animation to be the one to trigger this that we did before over here. So the weapon controller is just a script. This kills me to have to make a script just for this, but yeah, next time I might try that signal method. This is just going to call that populate damage text in battle algorithms. And that right here is going to call the damage text method, which we already had from before down here. This is what actually spawns the damage text on whatever the target is. And when we originally set these methods, you'll see that I null out the target enemy if it's a character we're targeting, and vice versa. That way I can tell in this script by which one is null if I'm attacking an enemy or a character. So in the case it's a character, we're doing this, update character damage, and in the case of it's enemy, then we're going to go to this damage enemy method, and that's right here, these two methods. So here, update character, we're going to fire off this damaging character event, and if we're damaging the enemy, damaging enemy event, and then we're just going to pass the object in as well. Notice here first I'm of course subtracting the HP, and we're going to use that to update in the battle controller. So the events, of course, just like the other ones, I defined them up here. So damaging character event will pass in a character, and the damaging enemy event will pass in an enemy. You'll see I'm passing null as the sender, because this is a kind of quick way to define an event in C#. It's automatically expecting the object as the sender. Since this is a static class, you can't send an instance.
In the end, there can be only one.
There's no instance of the object, so I'm just passing null in here, so I can have that, so I can have that easy syntax basically. So in the battle controller, I've added subscribing to those events in the ready method right here. So here, that just means when that damaging character event gets fired off, it's going to get noticed here, and we're going to run this method. And then same with damage enemy, I've got update such and such afterwards. And that's what I'm symbolizing down here. These things are the events that get fired off from each, and these are the methods here in this script which are going to actually run when that happens. So right here, update character after attack. Again, the object doesn't matter, that's the null, but we're going to get the character. Now this is the character that in that battle algorithm script we already changed their HP. So this is going to happen in any case. This and this, basically the same thing. Regardless of whether we're attacking a character or an enemy, we're going to set their timer bar to 0 because they just made a move. We're going to remove their character index from the characters with full timer bar list, which gets used in the process method when we're incrementing those timer bars. And then we're going to say active player exists equals false, and we're going to set the active character to -1, which means no active character. Now there may be other characters that already have a full timer bar, and this, I made a comment right here just to remind myself of that. That's going to be okay, because in the process method we're always checking for a full timer bar every tick, and then it's going to set those instantly to whatever they should be in this case. So then we're going to update the character stats and pass in the character. And the reason that's a separate method is because that's not going to happen if it's an enemy. It's only going to happen on the character. So this right here is going to update the character stats, which is going to be the UI, literally. And that's particular to the character because obviously the enemy doesn't have the life bar and the HP indication and everything. So what this is just going to do is going to get the character's name. And I've added a group to the character name labels and the HP labels. Those are both in the battle canvas, just as a refresher here. Remember, we've got the name. So we're going to update this right here. The way that's going to happen is they're all named, as such and such 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the label player, which is the name, that's how we're going to determine it's the right character. Those, I've added to this character name labels group, and that's the case for each one. And the HP label, which is this piece right here, those have all been added to HP labels group. That way I don't need to dig unnecessarily through this tree. So right here we've got the character's name already, of course. So for each label and character name labels, if the label's text contains the character name, we're going to set the last character of that, which is the number, that's going to become an index. It's going to be a string, which is a little weird, but it's going to work because we're going to look for that index in the HP labels as well, and that's also a string. So same thing here. If the label name to string contains that target index, which we just set, so it would be 1 in the case of Tina, or 2 in the case of Locke. Then we're going to set the text to the character's HP that was passed in. And remember, the character that gets passed, this is coming back from that algorithms method, so it's already got the adjusted HP. So this is going to make it whatever it is. Something I forgot to say is in battle algorithms right here, I'm already updating the database value for the character's HP. That's, again, we kind of covered that in previous tutorials. All this is doing is passing in the character object, and then in LightDB it's going to get updated in the database handler. So that is going to persist the HP. And that's different from the enemy, of course, because in the enemy, the database is just storing what values they start out with. So obviously we're not updating the Rhinotaur data in the database. That's just the stats that they come with. So we're going to use the object in the scene for the enemy. That's the difference here. So here we have update after enemy damage here. So this is where we're going to do that instead. So again, a lot of this is the same. We're going to do that to reset everything. Now, since we don't have that database reference for the enemies, I need to know which enemy I'm going to be updating. So this is something else I added, is this battle list index, which I added to the enemy object here. So this would now be a column in the database as well. But this is one of the advantages of NoSQL, and in gaming you're typically updating how you're doing things, so I don't have to create a whole new database column and screw with my schema just because I did this. I can just store this. So that's what I'm doing in the battle controller. I want to go back to this just quick because I forgot to mention that as well. So this is the method that we originally passed in here when we're first setting those variables. I set this battle list index to whatever the hand cursor index is here. And that way that object that gets stored keeps that index. So that way when it comes back around, which we're doing down here, I'm going to set the, I'm going to use that index to find the enemy in the enemies list here, because that's the one whose HP or whatever I'm going to update. For some reason this prints out both the same every time, but then the next time I see the HP is actually reduced. So it's clearly just a race condition. So if you try it this exact way, this isn't going to look like it should. So again, we got the enemy by the index. So now we're going to set the enemy, which is the one in that list here, to the enemy, which is the one that we passed into the method that should have the updated HP. And down here, we're actually going to take them out if their HP is less than or equal to 0. So I added the enemy death sound here, so just drag the file you want in there, so that way we can play this. So just like the other ones, I created a private static variable here to store that, so that way it's just easy to work with. And in the ready method, I set it to that node path that we just put in that battle template scene. So back to this. Now we're going to use that when we kill off the enemy. I just made a tween to create a delay here. There's probably a more specific way to do it, but this I know to work. So this just creates the tween here. And then tween callback like we used before. If we do callable from and then this anonymous method initializer, if you put brackets here, you can basically put whatever code you want in there, and then set delay is going to set a delay of 1 second. So I did try it. When the final blow comes to the enemy, if you don't have some sort of delay, you don't even hear the poof. It's just gone. It doesn't look right. So this delays 1 second after that final blow before the enemy actually disappears and makes that poofy sound. So here it just plays the sound and then cue free. All of that happens after 1 second. Something to keep in mind is this does create some issues with the code when it's trying to look through the lists and whatnot, because now we've got one that's been freed. I'll probably cover that at a later time, but it's just going to require some adjustments where, we can use link. Whenever it's iterating over something, we can do a few things. We can store the index values, which have already been freed when this happens, and exclude them, something like that. But it'll work. It'll kill off the enemy. And let's watch it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is going to pull this over to the other monitor so I can watch the HP debugging as we're doing those hits on the Rhinotaur. Can't really show them both effectively here, but take my word for it. So we're only going to attack with Locke because I didn't put the battle animation or the Lightbringer on Tina, so it would give me an error if I tried that. So we're just going to wail away at the Rhinotaur with Locke. And we see everything working fine so far. We are gradually decreasing the enemy object's HP right now. This will put him down to like 40 something, I think. I think 2 more should do it. So I'm going to attack myself as well now, because we do have that character update method that we were looking into, and that will update the UI as well as the database. So you'll see it reflected here, and it'll persist as well. So I'm just going to do that. Ouch. There we go. Cool. So back over here, deal with the Rhinotaur after the masochism. And this will be his last hit, so this should do the trick. Way hey.